get started, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to draw your attention to the hall in which we're currently sitting. It's known as Currie Hall and is a tribute to Lieutenant General Sir Arthur Currie. And you'll notice that it's adorned with much history of the Canadian Forces. I'd like to draw your eyes upward first to the beams along the ceiling that are adorned with the monograms of King George V, Queen Mary, and the Prince of Wales, the monograms of the senior generals of the Canadian Corps, the Corps commanders Alderson, Byng, and Currie, and several division commanders. Just below that, you'll see the portraits along the wall that depict the division commanders. Of importance, just to your right as you walk in the upper floor is Lieutenant General Sir Arthur Currie, for whom this hall is named, and just above me is Major General MacDonald, who's responsible for the first RMC West Point Exchange. Below that, along the oak panels, you'll see the regimental and corps badges painted by Major Stuart Forbes. And just below that, the arms depicting the locales of the regiments. But without further ado, let me introduce the esteemed judges who have so kindly volunteered their time and expertise to judge this debate. The judge from RMCC is Dr. Pierre R. Roberge, Vice Principal of Academics and the Dean of the Division of Continuing Studies Department. Dr. Roberge obtained his PhD in Physical Chemistry in 1982 on the subject of chloralkali diaphragm cells. Besides teaching in the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Engineering at the Royal Military College of Canada, he has since then worked as a research scientist for various industries in the Department of National Defense. His research activities have covered a wide spectrum of topics, from the development of accelerated tests for the characterization of metallic materials and electrochemical power sources, such as batteries and fuel cells, to the design and development of information systems. Dr. Roberge is presently Dean of the Division of Continuing Studies and Vice Principal of Academics at RMCC. Dr. Pierre Roberge is the author or co-author of more than 100 scientific publications in journals and book chapters, plus nearly 200 papers in conference proceedings. He is also the author of numerous books on corrosion, as well as being the webmaster for the popular Corrosion Doctors website. Dr. Roberge has been an active member of a few technical societies since joining RMC in 1982, and has chaired various committees and organizations such as the American Society for Testing of Materials, the Canadian section of the Electrochemical Society, the International Society for Electrochemistry, the Metallurgical Society of the Canadian Institute of Mining, Metallurgy, and Petroleum, the National Association of Corrosion Engineers International. He has also chaired and organized conference sessions or full conferences for these organizations. Our second judge hails from Queen's University and is their Principal and Vice-Chancellor, Dr. Daniel Robert Woolf. Daniel is the 20th Principal and Vice-Chancellor of Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. He is an historian and proud alumnus who returned to his alma mater from the University of Alberta in Edmonton to begin his 5-year term on September 1st, 2009. In addition to his role as principal, Dr. Woolf is a professor in the Department of History. He supervises graduate students and participates on a part-time basis in undergraduate teaching. He has also continued his research activities in British history and the global history of historical writing. He has recently published 2 books, The Oxford History of Historical Writing, Volume 5, in a series of which he is also general editor, and a textbook on historiography entitled A Global History of History for Cambridge University Press. Born in London, England, Dr. Woolf grew up in Winnipeg. He studied at Queen's University and at Oxford University, returning to Queen's as a Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council postdoctoral fellow in history in 84 to 86. He taught first at Queen's and then at Bishop's University before joining Dalhousie University's History Department in 1987. He became a full professor in 1994, serving as Associate Dean and then Acting Dean of Graduate Studies. In 1999, he moved to McMaster University as Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, and in 2002, joined the University of Alberta as Dean of Arts. As a senior university administrator, Dr. Woolf has a proven track record in governance, financial management, and employee engagement. He is extensively involved in external relations and advancement programming, including fundraising and alumni relations, as well as community outreach. A powerful advocate for each institution for which he's worked, he has led the development of many innovative campus projects and initiatives. A specialist in early modern cultural history and in the history of historical thought and writing, is the author and editor of a number of scholarly articles, monographs, books, and encyclopedias. In 2004, Dr. Woolf was awarded the John Ben Snow Foundation Prize for the best book by a North American scholar in any field of British studies focusing on the period between the Middle Ages and the 18th century. He is a Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of London in 2005 and was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada in 2006. Our third judge and guest head judge is Brigadier General Timothy Trainor, PhD, the 13th Dean of the Academic Board at West Point. Trainor's former position was Professor and Head of the Department of Systems Engineering at the U.S. Military Academy. Brigadier General Trainor graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree from West Point in 1983 and entered the engineer branch of the U.S. Army. As an engineer officer, he served in operational assignments around the world to include Germany, Honduras, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Fort Riley, Kansas, and Sarajevo in Bosnia. Brigadier General Trainor deployed to Basra, Iraq in the summer of 2007 and worked with the UK-led Provincial Reconstruction Team in helping the provincial Iraqi leaders improve their infrastructure and revitalization plans. Brigadier General Trainor currently serves on the Board of Fellows for the David Crawford School of Engineering at Norwich University. He teaches courses in engineering management, systems engineering, and decision analysis. As an analyst, he helped develop the Installation Status Report that provides the Army a standardized means to assess infrastructure and environmental conditions on installations to support resources, allocation, and decisions. He has applied decision analysis methods in completing an organizational analysis of the Army's Installation Management Agency and in assessing defense security cooperation programs. And now for the debaters. We thank our judges for their contribution of time and for the fact that it's a true Canadian winter day outside and that they've all made it here safely. But I would be remiss not to mention the debating participants today. The West Point cadets are Cadet Meghan Wentz and Cadet Meyer Ungerman. Meghan is an international history and economics double major from Tempe, Arizona. She is a third-year member of the parliamentary debate team and is currently serving as the assistant cadet in charge. She is also active in Habitat for Humanity and is the adjutant NCO for her regiment. After graduation, Meghan plans to branch either quartermaster or adjutant general. When she's not studying, Meghan enjoys reading, scrapbooking, and running. The second debater from West Point is Cadet Meyer Ungerman. His major is mechanical engineering with a subdiscipline in biomechanics. Meyer is from Dallas, Texas, and this is Meyer's second year competing on the parliamentary debate team. He's also heavily involved with the Scoutmasters Council. He plans on graduating in May 2016. Now from home, the debaters from RMC are Officer Cadet Nicholas Huxter and Officer Cadet Edward Woolley. Nicholas is a major in history and minor in French and is from Toronto, Ontario. He's a third-year member of the RMC debate team and its current president. As well, he serves as a section commander for the Aboriginal Leadership Opportunity Year and is the vice president for the Peer Assistant Group. His trade is infantry officer, and he plans on specializing in being a paratrooper and joining either the Royal 22e Regiment or the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. He plays jazz piano and enjoys golf and squash. The second debater from RMC is Naval Cadet Edward Woolley. Edward is studying military and strategic studies and hails from Caledonia in Ontario. He is a fourth-year cadet here at RMC and is in his second year with the debate team. He is also involved with Model NATO and Model UN teams and the RMC band. He's currently training to be a maritime surface and subsurface officer and will be graduating this year. So now a brief overview of how debate works. So how does this style of debate work? There are two sides, the government who speaks first and the opposition who try to deny victory to the government. The government will come up and try to rebuild their case, and once again the opposition will try to tear down their case, and the side government will close the debate. The side government will bring forth the topic as well as the terms of debate. They will come up here and try to convince you why their ideal or plan is of consequential importance and improvement on the status quo. The opposition will show you that no good can come from the government's plan and that the costs outweigh the potential benefits. Debaters may interrupt another debater's speech by asking questions known as points of information, so do not be alarmed by this perfectly normal and it is in fact expected of the debaters. After each debater has had a chance to speak, both opposing and government will rebut the closing side as well as discuss the merits of their prospective side. Parliamentary debate is about how well each side presents their case. While facts play an important and pivotal role in normal discourse, it is far more important that debaters develop their points logically and that their opponents respond to the facts in question. Without further ado, I invite the debaters to take the stage.
Brigadier General Trainor, who's our chief judge, to introduce the resolution and give a bit of a background to it. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome General Trainor.
Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We have before us a resolution, and be it resolved that show me the leaders. Show me the leaders. We think it's time that countries stop touching their noses as a way to avoid doing anything about a very serious problem in the world. Thousands of innocent people are being murdered in Syria by forces loyal to the government, criminals, and foreign insurgents who are happy to have a place to ply their evil craft. It is time to stop it is time to stop pretending that nothing can be done and for someone to put on the mantle of leadership. So we, the government, firmly believe that Canada, the US, and the UK should show us the leaders and take combined military action to stop the killing in Syria. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the House is now in order and will call upon the Prime Minister to present Her Majesty's government's plan as to how they will meet the resolution. Be it resolved that Canada, the United States, and UK should take military action to stop the violence in Syria.
Just before I start, I'd like to make a comment. Unfortunately, my partner right now is a substitute. My partner that we're preparing for has taken ill, unfortunately. But he is in here in spirit because he is a avowed royalist, as shown by his bald head of the Queen, who will constantly wave to the entire face. She's solar powered. She's environmentally friendly. Honorable judges, patient time for my most esteemed opponents and large audience. I stand before you today to debate the resolution that Canada will be resolved that the US, the United States, and Canada should take combined military action to stop the civil war in Syria. What I'd like to say, first of all, is that the time has come. The time has come for the people of this nation and of the nations of America and the UK to take action which is not only morally just, but is also strategically right. What we have today is we have a resolution which is about a choice that we need to make now to save people that we will have never met, people that we do not know, in a language that they do not speak, in a culture that is completely alien to us. But nonetheless, they are the brothers, our brothers in the human race, for the fact that they live somewhere else in another part of the world, and they are not as privileged as us to have had the lottery of birth to be born in such free and prosperous countries as the ones that we live in now. So, what I'd like to start out by saying is that I would like to define the resolution as the Anglo-American Alliance, the same one that defeated the Nazis and communism, will rise again and defeat the issue of Syria. And what I mean by the issue of Syria is the humanitarian crisis. What we will do is we will have a fleet off the coast. We will not be setting in troops. This will not be another Iraq. And the reason why I say that was because Libya is the success case that we want to build our case around. And the idea is this, that our people, the Americans, the Canadians, and the British, who have trained together for years and decades, already know how to interact constructively. And we know that the issues taking place in Syria are of a grave matter, where there are 100,000 dead, and where chemical weapons are used and have been used. The fact is, it is morally right that we take this action now. The fact that we haven't done it before does not mean that what we have done is right. It means that we have made mistakes in the past. But nonetheless, we can rectify that at this moment. At this point in time, we can make the decision that this is the right thing that we should do. But the point I'd like to make is that we are pursuing this. This is an idea, ladies and gentlemen, and that the broader military plan will be left to the planners, will be left to the experts. I can only give you the broadest strokes of what this plan will be. But what we must do is stop the humanitarian disaster first, and that what we also must do is leave the political decision to the people of Syria. The reason why we must go there and be the arbiter of democracy, the arbiter of peace, and the arbiter of humanity is because right now there is a stalemate. Mr. Speaker, we stand before ourselves with the understanding that this will continue without any change. What we must do, and what must be done by all of us, is to understand that it is our moral obligation, our principle, and our democratic and governmental priority to make sure that the free peoples of the world, or the peoples of the world that aren't free, and that are oppressed right now, and that are being killed, are not. That we make just one part of the world, one small part, one small number of people have a brighter light. And the reason why Syria is because right now, on this vast earth, it is the darkest spot. It is a civil war in the public eye, but there is so much going on in the background. The status quo is unacceptable. We could say that we could have done this years ago, and you know what? Damn right we should have. We should have acted sooner. We always should have acted sooner. We should have acted sooner in the Second World War. America should have maybe entered 2 years before. But we all believe that acting sooner is the best way. We should attack the issue at its core before it gets worse. It's 120,000 right now. That's how many there are dead in Syria. Do we have to wait until it's 200,000, 500,000, 1 million, 2 million, till this issue leaves the pages of our papers and is just an afterthought? No, we need to make this issue now and today because it is an issue affecting them now and today. There are people, there are children, there are women, there are families that are not living a life that they deserve because of the fact that they are in this civil war about arbitrary differences and about the idea that one group or another group should be in power. As of right now, that's not our concern. The political concern is to every Syrian. We will give them the ability to make that decision. And the reason why we can't allow them to make that decision is because, or that we can't have that happen right now, is the situation with the peace treaties and all that. There is no trust between them. In the last week, there was the issue of there being a conference between the various involved powers, from Syria to Iran to Russia. And you know what? The Iranians, well actually, Ban Ki-moon invited the Iranians. And you know what happened? The Syrians, the free Syrians, the rebels, they were totally opposed to it. Why? Because the tactics of the Iranians have been practically barbaric. They've been making sure, through support of Hamas and other groups, that they have been using brutal, inhuman tactics against civilians. Secret police shooting masses of people for no reason other than the fact that they do not support the government. What comes before us today, ladies and gentlemen, is the idea that we must act now because later on will only be worse. What we have is the moral imperative of right now. There are few situations in the world where you know for a fact that you are doing something right. Right now we do. Right now, this action is right. Now, the other side may come across and say, we can't pay for this. Really? There's a $16 trillion debt in the United States. You don't want to add another maybe $50 billion just to save hundreds of thousands of people? There are millions of refugees in Turkey. The instability in the region will only get worse. And your only idea is the idea that it may cost sense, and you know what? It may cost lives. And this is a point that I will have to concede. We may lose men and women for that. But we also understand, as men and women of the uniform, of the Canadian Forces, of the American Army, that we have chosen a life where we may risk our lives, where we may die, so that the freedom and liberty of our peoples and of peoples around the world is preserved. That is why I stand before you today, ladies and gentlemen, not just because I believe that the resolution is right, but because you believe the resolution is right. Because there is no other option to take. Because there is no other option that history will look favorably upon. Because right now, when your grandchildren ask you, how did you think about that? You'll say, I wanted action. And you know what? You'll be right. Thank you very much.
I thank Prime Minister Huxter for his opening remarks on just war theory, and now call upon the first member of Her Majesty's loyal opposition for the first 7-minute constructive presentation by the opposition.
Here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to everyone for being here today. We're really excited to talk about this case. But the first thing we want to do is set up a little framework for you for how side opposition views this case. And we're going to look at it from a cost-benefit analysis sort of perspective. So we know that there are going to be major costs in intervening in Syria. Side government comes up here and tells you, oh, we'll just put naval bombardments on the side that we did in Libya. That'll work great. Okay. We do not think on side opposition that you can gain any sort of effectiveness by using a naval bombardment in Syria. Why is this true? Because unlike Libya, in Syria, most of the military insurgents, most of the conflict is going on within cities. So basically what side government is telling you is that they're going to bombard cities in Syria indiscriminately to solve this problem. We don't think on our side of the house this is an effective solution. So therefore, in order to gain any sort of efficacy, all of our combined forces will need to get boots on the ground in Syria. Knowing that is true, and we believe it is, that puts a big perspective on the cost of us getting involved. So we don't believe that it is worth the cost to get involved in Syria. And I have 3 major reasons for you why. Because side government comes up here and gives you a lot of lofty ideals about freedom and obligation and all these great things we can do. But on side opposition, we are grounded in reality. And we know that there are some serious costs to this, and it will not work out the way side government tries to tell you it will. So our first point on our side of the house is that we will have limited effectiveness involved in Syria. So the first question is, side government comes up here and says, well, we won't intervene in their politics. We won't make any decisions. Okay, well, then what will you do, side government? What will you do when you get to Syria? Will you just kill all the military people? Will you just depose Assad? And if you do, what happens next? Who is to say that the leader that follows him will be any more humanitarian, will be any more friendly to anyone than the current regime is? We don't believe there will be any efficacy in this. We cannot export democracy, as side government seems to think. We like to think we can, but our experience in Afghanistan and our experience in the Middle East and watching the Arab Spring has shown us that we can't. So, we do not think there will be any sort of real efficacy to us being involved there. It will just be a lot of conflict like we've had in the Middle East for over a decade now. We've done a lot of people have died, and what have we accomplished? What tangible thing can we have to show for this? We don't think we will have this luck in Syria either. So, our next point is that there will be some serious negative impacts internationally for us getting involved in Syria. The first one, obviously, is Russia. So, one of the reasons that we're not there right now is because Russia has a very close relationship with the Assad regime. They talk them down from the chemical weapons thing. We have a little tentative deal going on with Russia right now where nothing gets too crazy and we don't get involved. So, if the US, Canada, and the UK start invading Syria with boots on the ground to try and end this war, Russia's going to be very annoyed with us. We don't want that international conflict right now. We never have, and we don't definitely want it now. So, another problem is the image of the United States. So the US already has an image as being kind of a meddler. We like to get involved in trying to save everybody's problems. The problem is we like to export democracy and try and do things our way. People don't like that. We have a negative image the more we try and get involved and make everyone think the way we do. Canada and the UK have the same problem. So we think that we will have a negative impact on, a negative impact on our international image by getting involved in this, but you disagree.
Does the opposition believe that our national security interests and humanitarian concerns should be dictated by whether or not the Russians are happy with it?
I don't believe we have a national security issue in Syria right now. Syria doesn't trust the United States, Canada, or the UK as it stands right now. And I have a third point about morality, so I'll get there. Finally, my last point about international issues is chemical weapons. Because right now, the Syrian regime, we know they have them, but obligation, a moral obligation to end people fighting. Okay, we would love to end every genocide in the world. We would love to end every case of humanitarian inequality. We would love to make the world have everyone is free and equal and has democracy. But sadly, that is not the world we live in, ladies and gentlemen. We cannot achieve that goal. So where do we draw the line? Yes?
So you're saying because it's difficult all over, we shouldn't stop one thing now?
I'm saying that why is Syria any different from everywhere else that we should have gone, that we should have done anything differently? We can't go solve all of the world's problems. And by trying, we make them worse. Because we try to export democracy, we try to make these ideals and say, oh, it's going to be so much better after we've gone there and cleaned everything up. But it's not always better, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes it's worse. And we don't want to create an environment where we go in there, sweep everything clean, give them a clean slate, and then the new result is worse than it was before. So while we love the idea of our coalition forces being able to stop inequality all over the world, we don't think that's a very realistic objective for us. So the question is, then where do we turn our attentions to? And we turn our attentions to diplomatic alternatives. We turn our attentions towards being a, we can condemn this. We don't agree with what Assad is doing, ladies and gentlemen. We don't agree with anything. But where can we be most effective? And we argue that we are not most effective, boots on the ground, trying to change the nature of the government in Syria. So ultimately, side government's case rests on this broader idea of idealism and morality. Side opposition comes up to you with facts. Facts that, unfortunately, in reality, we can't achieve the ideals side government is telling you you can. We would love to solve the world's problems, ladies and gentlemen, but unfortunately we cannot do that. So as side opposition, we think it would be in the best interest of the coalition, in the best interest of Syria, and the best interest of the international community if we do not invade Syria and try and find another route. Thank you.
The House thanks Ms. Wentz for enthusiastic comments and now calls upon the Minister of National Defense to further the government's plan in their second seven-minute constructive speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start off by rebutting a point that the opposition brought up here. They said that their policy is the one that is grounded in reality. I have to start here by reiterating what the reality of on the ground in Syria is. The reality is that 120,000 people have been murdered in the last 3 years. The reality on the ground is that chemical weapons have been used against innocent civilians. The reality on the ground is that a humanitarian crisis is unfolding before our eyes, and the only people who are equipped to stop it are us, the Anglo-American alliance, which has stood throughout the 20th century as the best bastion of freedom and human rights in the entire world. The question before us today is an age-old question. Am I my brother's keeper? This afternoon, what I'm going to do is deconstruct the opposition's points and explain why their case doesn't stand. Why their case is fundamentally an amoral solution that is not worthy of democratic and human rights-loving nations. After that, I'm going to go into a deconstruction of the government's case about why this is a moral imperative that we intervene, why it works in our strategic interests, and why efforts to negotiate will ultimately fail because of the people we are negotiating against. Now, I'm going to start off by taking on the opposition's points over a cost-benefit analysis. Quite frankly, in the cost-benefit analysis, how does one put a premium on a human life? The question here is, how much is too much? I would like to believe that everybody in this auditorium, Mr. Speaker, everybody who advocates for freedom would believe that there is a point beyond which we must take a stand. The only question is, what will that point be? Is it at 1 million lives? Is it at 2 million? Is it 3 million? Just 1 second. This is a question that we have faced before, and after the Rwandan genocide, we took a look and we said never again. Unfortunately, our memories appear to be short, and never again apparently meant 15 years. We don't believe that here in the government. I'll take your question.
How about we intervene to the point where we can do something effective?
I reject the dichotomy. Fundamentally, I don't believe that what we are doing will be ineffective. The opposition seems to believe that's the case. In Libya, I will reiterate that our actions enforcing a naval blockade, our actions using air power, were in fact effective. And I will reiterate that the opposition isn't quite sure of the terms of the debate. They use the phrase, boots on the ground, which is a point we specifically disavowed in the Prime Minister's introduction. We are not proposing boots on the ground. We are proposing a solution that did work in Libya, and that has a reasonable chance of succeeding in Syria as well. Fundamentally, we aren't about building democracy. We've talked about that before. The experience in Iraq has shown us that that was a mistaken approach to how we deal with interactions in the world. That does not mean that we have to stand by when genocides occur. We aren't going in there and putting our troops on the ground, rebuilding a stable democracy, and making Syria into a new country. That is not our objective. Let us be very clear here. Our objective is to save human lives. We want to put an end to the conflict. We want to put an end to the mass murder that is going on in the hands of Bashar al-Assad. We are not saying that we want to impose our own system of government. And we believe it's well within our power to do so. One of the main problems facing the Syrian opposition today is the fact that they are massively outgunned in air power. We are the only ones who can provide them with the air power that's necessary to stop chemical weapons, to stop indiscriminate bombings of civilians. That's what's before us today. So we are talking about an effective solution. Quite frankly, the opposition seems a bit confused with some of the points they brought up. They said the Arab Spring's shown us that we can't help. But in fact, we've only intervened once in the Arab Spring, in Libya. And the case there is true. We brought an end to the war. Our actions helped bring down a dictator who murdered and raped and tortured his own people. And I think that's an objective. And the government believes it's a worthy objective to continue that policy with regards to Syria. We don't think the opposition's case stands in their criticisms because we do not believe that human lives can be measured in terms of money and resources. Quite frankly here, in 20, 30, 40 years, we are going to have to answer the question posed by our children and our children's children. And they will ask us what we did when people were being slaughtered, when people were being killed, when people were being tortured. We can either say we had the capacity to act and to bring about a positive good, to save human lives. Or we can say, well, there was a lot of money and so we kind of stayed home. How do you want to be when the final judgment of history comes? Ronald Reagan once said that there is no argument about the choice between peace and war. At the end of the day, there is only one option: fight or surrender. In this case, the opposition's proposition that we do not get involved in Syria amounts to nothing more than surrender at the cost of innocent human lives. We have the military capacity more than anybody else on the planet to enact good, and we've shown that we can. In Sierra Leone, in the Balkans, we've shown in Libya that we are able to enact good. The approaches are different. Sometimes there are boots on the ground, sometimes there aren't. All we want to do here is give a fighting chance to the people who are trying to achieve a better life for them and their children. Fundamentally, intervening in Syria is in our strategic interest. Russia's getting involved right now, as they've reiterated and seem to think that that should scare us away. Russia's getting involved, but doesn't that mean we should push back against them? Should we vacate the Middle East to let Russia take up a dominant strategic position? I say, no, we cannot. That is not a responsible course of action. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the question before us is, do we advance, do we keep being a beacon for human rights and liberty, or do we abandon our commitments to allies in the region, to human rights, and let the Russians fill the vacancy? I don't think that's a responsible position. The Right Honourable Prime Minister has already talked about the moral imperative, and I don't think I need to make that case much more. Fundamentally, the question before us is, thousands of people have died. It is within our power to stop it, therefore we have a moral obligation to stop it. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "The time is always right to do what is right." And for those of us to whom much is given, much is required indeed. Will we sacrifice some lives? It may be so. But are we willing to say that we will not sacrifice our lives? Is it between our children and their children? And as long as it doesn't bother us, we'll let it be? My final point I'm just going to briefly touch on is that negotiation is not a viable option. I do not believe, as President Bush once did, that you can look into the eyes of President Putin and see his soul. I believe it's cold and dark and black there. I believe that you cannot negotiate with despots and dictators. And if you attempt to do so, you will be outboxed like Neville Chamberlain before the Second World War. We need to stand for human rights, we have the capacity to act, and it's in our best interest. Fundamentally, there's no good reason not to get involved unless you're intent on nickel and diming human lives. Thank you very much. On this, the government rests its case.
Passionate advocacy for the expansion of jus ad bellum And now call upon the Leader of Her Majesty's Most Loyal Opposition for his 7-minute instructive speech, followed by his 3-minute final rebuttal.
I'd like to start by thanking Canada for the excellent weather and the snow. Being from Dallas, Texas, the only time I see snow is in a snow cone and I'm about to eat it. So it's beautiful to see a change of climate. I also like to thank them for poutine because I probably gained 4 pounds while I've been here. Now to get into the debate. This room is not full of philosophers. This room is full of military men and women who know that there's a difference between our ideals and the reality we can achieve. So in this round, we're going to prove to you why our side of the house is going to turn out to be a better reality. While we believe in their lofty ideals, we simply cannot achieve that by the groundwork they have laid out for you. And why is this the case? First, even if we buy their framework, that a naval strike on cities will make all the Assad military and Assad disappear, even if we buy that, and that the civilians are being murdered by a corrupt regime, who is to say that the next regime that is going to take power will not be just as corrupt? Who is to say the next government will not also hate people within Syria? And guess what? This next government will have the same chemical arsenal that Assad has at his disposal. And to go into some history, why is Assad not using chemical weapons on this very day? Because Russia said, Russia has a port in Syria, their only port to the Mediterranean, which is their claim in Syria. And Russia, so that we wouldn't get involved, came to the US and UK, they said, don't use chemical weapons or the West is going to get involved. So Assad said, okay. But if we get involved, all limits will be off. Assad will open up his chemical arsenal and unleash even more indiscriminate fire on civilians and do even more damage to his already distraught population. Now to get into our points. 1. Our first point is effectiveness. So even if you oppose Assad, then what? You may have a corrupt regime, or you may get a good regime. There's still the chemical weapon arsenal in Assad. But let's back up. We don't believe these naval bombardments will succeed. They keep giving us the example of Libya. They say, oh look, Libya is the perfect example of a NATO strike gone right, and now Libya is the best place to live in the Middle East. This is a good example of military intervention. Let's look at Syria now. What is the problem in Syria? Chemical weapon attacks within cities. Why is that the case? Because the military is within the cities, the same cities the populace you're trying to save is in. What is a naval bombardment or an airstrike going to do? They're going to level the city. The same cities that hold the citizens you are trying to protect with their ideals. So even if we choose to have a Canadian, the United States, and the UK naval bombardment and airstrike of these Libyan cities, you don't get any of the benefits on their side of the house because you're going to be killing civilians. Innocent civilians, and whose hand will that death be on? That death will be on your hands. That death will be on the hands of the Canadians, the United States service members, and the British service members that had to fire that missile, and they had to end lives. And that is a huge psychological impact that we believe is very pernicious for their side of the house that we would have to face as the Allied forces. And we believe without boots on the ground, which they've clearly said we're not doing, that you cannot effectively depose the Assad regime and the entire military. Because once you take out Assad, the military will get desperate. The Assad-oriented military will turn to their chemical weapons, use them on civilians, and cause even more tragedy, even more civilian disaster. So that's our first point of effectiveness, and we think this point alone wins the round, but even if it doesn't, we're going to go into our next points. The negative impacts this will have internationally and domestically. So we are on the United Nations Security Council, the Big Five, us, and Russia. So they try to give you, not at this time, they try to give you a false dichotomy. They say, don't let Russia run your foreign policy. If we don't do this, Russia's going to fill the vacuum and take over the entire Middle East. Let's go back in history. Russia tried that in Afghanistan, and they lost. Why did they lose? Because the people of the Middle East don't want the West meddling in their affairs. They are fundamentally against it. Like my partner said, you cannot export democracy. You cannot force our way of life on people who do not want it. So why try it? So we also believe, like lofty ideals, they're going to try to say we're the immoral side. We also believe humanitarian efforts should always be the highest priority, but we don't believe you achieve protecting human rights on their side of the house because it's simply not effective like they would have you believe. Next, the death that you would cause from those Canadians and US and UK service members, like I said, has a huge negative psychological impact on the domestic population of our nations. So now our nations are directly responsible for killing the civilians that are in the cities, which is where the military is, which is the difference between Syria and Libya. They keep trying to bring up Libya, but it is simply not the same case, and you cannot look at it under the same light because they are fundamentally different cases. So this would be another fruitless war that the West would get into. Since 2001, we have been at war in the Middle East. The American people and the Canadian people and the people of the United Kingdom are tired of fighting fruitless wars that they see no benefit to. We fight these wars with very little results. Okay? The American people in our day-to-day life don't see any results in the Afghanistan war that benefit them. The Canadian people don't understand why we're in Afghanistan. Not this side. I'm in the middle of something. We don't see the benefits on our domestic front, so it's going to be hard to get the entire backing of these nations to make a naval attack on the cities of Syria that won't even be that effective. Our third point is the morality of warfare. So what did I say about chemical weapons? I believe both sides of the House agree chemical weapons are completely immoral and outside of just war theory. So in the status quo right now, the Assad regime is not using chemical weapons because Russia told them not to, for the framework I previously stated. If we choose to attack them, then the only limit we have, which is Russia, will say, we'll let off all hands, and that chemical arsenal will be used. I guarantee it, and it will be used on the civilians in Syria and the American, Canadian, and UK forces. Because if they do have a superior air force, if the Syrian government has a superior air force, they can drop those chemical weapons on our ships, which is a terrible detriment, which will kill our allied forces. So the morality of warfare is we need to keep chemical weapons from being used. And by attacking them, we will therefore increase the chemical weapons to be used. So normally in American parliamentary debate, it's different speeches, but in this it's one speech, so now I'm going into my rebuttal. So that was my constructive framework, and this is my rebuttal that I'm about to do. To do this, I'm going to ask some questions to crystallize the ground. 1. What is the reality versus the ideals? Like I said, we are military men and women in this room. Yes, we also believe that every human should have the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and not even the crown can take that away from us. But we simply don't believe you can export these ideals and this democracy to Syria via a missile coming from a naval ship attacking a Syrian city with the very civilians you're trying to save. We don't believe you achieve the reality of their ideals on their side of the house. Where on our side of the house, we don't have blood on American hands. We don't have, or Canadian hands. We don't have the civilian lives of Syria at risk. We don't have the unleashment of the chemical arsenal that Syria holds. And then to the final, or the penultimate crystallization of this round. What will happen even if we succeed with our naval bombardment? What will happen if we magically get Predator missiles into every home of every person who is allied with Assad? Then what? Then we will have the Syrian people who still aren't 100% homogenous vying for power. Someone will take power, and there is no guarantee that that someone will be any more benevolent, any more less inclined to use chemical weapons than the previous dictator. Because power can corrupt. And for someone who is power thirsty, just got out of a revolution, they're going to want to make changes. They're going to want to protect the people who helped them get into power. And by doing that, they're going to ostracize other people. So this continuation of hatred and this corrupt regime that we have a problem with, but in the status quo, could happen even further, even if those naval bombardments succeed, which we don't think they do. So they're going to get up here and they're going to talk about Libya and ideals, how we have the duty to protect every single human right of every single person. We also agree, we have a duty to protect human rights, but this is not the way to do it. This is not the way to do it. The reality is, we cannot achieve their benefits on their side of the house via a naval bombardment or airstrikes. simply because the situation in Libya and Syria is vastly different. It is vastly different, and for all these reasons, we are very proud to be in Canada and very proud to oppose.
The House congratulates the Leader of Her Majesty's Most Loyal Opposition for being the first in this debate to actually mention the United Nations Security Council, but less so for comparing Canada to a giant snow cone. The House now calls upon Prime Minister Huxter to deliver the government's closing remarks, reminding him that no new argument may be introduced during this 3-minute speech.
Hear, hear.
I'd like to first start off by saying that there's a lot of things that were said in the last speech, and I only got 3 minutes, so I can't get through everything that was wrong, but there was a lot wrong with that last speech. So first I'd like to start by saying, are we destroying cities? Is that what we're doing with airplanes, or are we just grounding the enemy planes? No, we're not going to indiscriminately destroy civilians because that's what the Assad regime is doing. We are indiscriminately going to destroy Assad's planes. We're going to ground those planes. We're going to ground the method of the delivery of chemical weapons. Because you know what? It's pretty inefficient to open up a canister, buy them. It's a lot easier to drop a plane on it. That way you can be 50 clicks away. The second thing is that they said that chemical weapons, that, you know what, there's going to be this big issue that if we invade, by the way, we never, ever, if you all have a good memory, which I assume you do, they do not. In my first speech, I made very clear that we were not going to do ground support. What we were going to do was we were going to have a fleet off the coast. And you know what's in a fleet? A nice set of planes. Some nice American planes, well built. Also, some British planes, maybe not so well built, but still reliable. What we will have is a fleet off the coast. We will have that ability to shoot down those planes, to stop the delivery of chemical weapons. And their primary argument for not acting is that there will be chemical weapons on the ground and he may use them. Okay, so what stops there? Any country can get chemical weapons. They're not particularly difficult to build. Unlike nuclear weapons, you don't need to have a very technical arsenal. Hell, you can build chemical weapons in your backyard if you got some Javex and some cleaners. You can make mustard gas in the bathroom if you really want to. So, no, I understand, right? If there's any chemical weapons, let's never go to war again. Also, collateral damage. I mean, if you ever have collateral damage, you should never go to war. That doesn't make any sense. That disavows every war. I mean, this whole room is a memorial to the people who fought in the First World War, who had no idea. And by the way, all these people are dead. None of these people are alive anymore. This whole memorial, this whole building is devoted to people that went to another part of the world, had no idea who they were fighting for, but did it anyways. So, another point that I'd like to contest is that we are not exporting democracy. At no point in my initial speech, or in the point of my Minister of National Defense, did we ever say that we were exporting democracy. We said we were exporting stability. That's what we were exporting. We were going to go in there, and you know what? We are going to remove Assad. Why? Because no one can deal with him right now. You know what? They all think he's a prick. You know what? And the reason why they think that is because he indiscriminately murders his people. And you know what? That's entirely the case. And they actually haven't ever countered that there is an enormous humanitarian crisis there. They have had no counter to the human rights. There are a lot of questions in this debate, which I just need to get to really quickly. The reality is, there is a lot of deaths in this country. There's a lot of deaths in Syria. And it is our moral obligation that they never counted. They never counted it was our moral obligation. All they ever said that, it's going to be difficult. Why don't we do it everywhere? Well, why don't we do it here? What is stopping us from this one spot? Well, we can't do it everywhere. Well, damn it, we can't fix everything, but we can at least fix one. Are we going to take action, or are we going to take inaction? Is that what we're going to accept? Are we going to accept that we as a people are just going to wait and just going to see how history turns out for us? No. We are going to take action. Why? Because, as we have clearly proven, action is right. In 1936, an American sergeant who was a Medal of Honor winner said, "Liberty and freedom and democracy are prized awarded only to those people who fight to win them, and they keep fighting eternally to hold them." I think he was right then, and I think he was right now. Thank you very much.